been having a problem. We're getting green potatoes because I store my potatoes on a vegetable rack. So I came up with the idea of making these potato sacks. I prefer this one, but this one was the first one I made. It's a little bit bigger. They're made of scraps of hessian fabric that we had. So let's get started in making these potato sacks. These are the fabrics you will need for the first bag. Please note that the hessian should be cut on the fold, so it will be 14 inches by 17 inches when the fabric is folded. For the first potato sack, I cut one length of hessian fabric 14 inches wide and 34 inches long. I cut it on the fold, as you can see, so it's actually 17 inches long. I then overlocked all of the sides. Hessian really frays badly, so I just thought it was best to overlock all the sides before I started. If you don't have an overlocker, you can just zigzag the sides on your normal sewing machine and that'll be just fine. And just to show that you can just zigzag, I've zigzagged one of the sides on my normal sewing machine. Trim off any loose threads. This is the side that I zigzagged. It's not as neat as the overlocking, but it does the job. Next, fold your sack in half and pin down each side. Then sew down each side, taking 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, backtacking at the start and sewing all the way down to the bottom of the first side and backtacking, and then sew all the way down the next side, again taking 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and backtacking at the start and the finish, removing any pins you need to as you go along. And trim any loose cotton threads, and if the sides need trimming at all, then do that. I just have a few little bits to trim off the side here, but overall I don't really need to. Next, give the seams a press with a nice hot iron. I spray my seams with some water to make it a little bit easier to press them. When you finish pressing, turn it the other way round so you now have your seams on the inside, and then give a quick press on the other side. And then pin or clip down all of the seams. We're going to sew down the seam again, enclosing the other seam allowance within the seam. At the sewing machine, sew down the first side, taking a 1/2 inch seam allowance this time, so that you have the 1/4 inch seam allowance enclosed on the inside. When you've done the first side, turn around and go back down the other side, again taking a 1/2 inch seam allowance, backtacking at the start and the finish. Now turn it back to the other side. This is the right side now. We've finished with the seams. It was probably a bit of overkill to do the overlocking and a French seam, but it does fray a lot, this fabric, so I just wanted to make sure it doesn't come undone. So press those seams again with a nice hot iron, and then we're going to turn the top edge under. So I measure 1 inch and iron the whole length of the top edge under by 1 inch, and pin in place. I iron and pin as I go, or you could use clips for this if you prefer. I am only turning this over the once because the side seams are so thick that I don't think you'd manage to sew over them if we turned the seam over twice. And it has been overlocked, so it should be okay. Anyway, once you've turned it over and pinned it all down, sew on your sewing machine, taking about a 3/4 of an inch seam allowance, backtacking at the start and the finish. Now with this bag, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible, so to pull it tight at the top once we've put our potatoes in, I'm using some twine and I'm just sewing it in and out with a bodkin. So I just go like do a running stitch, quite a large running stitch, all the way around the top edge, just a little bit below the 1 inch mark, and I go all the way round until I get back to where I started, and make sure that I end up with my twine coming out on the outside, so I've got 2 lengths of thread to tie. When you get back to where you started, or just before where you started, you want to leave about 1 inch between where you started and where you come out. Then you can pull it tight and tie a bow, and there you have a very simple rustic potato sack. But I thought it looked a little bit plain, so at this point I've decided to put a label on it. The next job is to make a label for your hessian potato sack. The first job is to iron some interfacing onto one of your sides of the small piece of calico that we have cut, and then place the second piece on top. with right sides facing, and then clip or pin together. And then I mark an opening at the bottom, so I leave about a 3-inch gap to turn it the right side out once I've sewn all around the sides. So next, at my sewing machine, I sew all the way around the sides, taking a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and remember to leave the opening that we marked, and back tacking at the start and the finish. Then clip all 4 corners close to the seam, but don't cut into the seam, otherwise it will come undone. Then turn the right side out through the opening that we left, and use something pointed to push out those corners. I have a special tool, but if you don't have a tool, you can use something like a knitting needle. With a hot iron, press all the seams and make sure that you turn under the opening. So turn under the seam allowance of the opening and then give it a good press. Then write potatoes on your little plaque you've just made. I mark out the halfway mark, the 1/4 and the 1/8 so I can space my 8 letters out evenly. I then use a friction pen, which can be ironed to remove it if I should go wrong, which I do go wrong on several occasions, and I can just iron it off. When I'm happy that I've done it right, I go over it with my thick fabric pen to set it. It's the opposite way around. The fabric pen needs ironing to set it, whereas the friction pen, you iron it to remove it. I finally got it right, so now I'm ironing it to set it. Now I can add the label to my sack. The sensible way to have done this would be to have put the label on before I made the bag up, but it was an afterthought, so I'm doing it afterwards. So sew all the way around the edge of your label, about 1/8 inch away from the edge. I do actually have to go at this from 2 directions, and I've had to remove my sewing machine table extension. So I kind of do 3 sides, and then I realise I can't get any further, so I have to stop and turn my fabric round to do the last side. But anyway, if you want to put a label on like this, my suggestion is that you do it before you put your bag together. So work out which side you want it on and add the label, but do remember we're doing French seams. So you actually want to put it on what you would think is the right side of the fabric, because we do a seam, turn it inside out, then do another seam. So just bear that in mind when adding your label. You will need the following fabric for the second sack. You can cut the hessian fabric in one continuous piece if you want to. So fold your fabric in half and then cut 12 inches by 14¼ inches. 12 inches is the width and 14¼ is the length. So if you fold your fabric in half, you will end up with one long piece of 28½ inches by 12 inches. Follow the instructions for making the potatoes label from the first bag. Then decide where you'd like to put your label and make sure that you have centred it and pin it in place on one of the sides, obviously. On this bag we've cut 2 separate pieces. You could do it in one continuous length like we did the first bag, but unfortunately I didn't have enough fabric to do that, so I've made it in 2 pieces. In fact, the one long piece would be better, and I'll leave the measurements for that. Anyway, so pin your potatoes label to your potato sack. Then top stitch your potatoes label to your sack about 1/8 inch away from the edge, back tacking at the start and the finish. You'll find it a lot easier to sew on when you do it at this stage. Trim off any loose threads with a small sharp pair of scissors or a pair of snips, and then place your 2 sack panel pieces together with the right sides out. So you want wrong sides facing and both the right sides out. Next, take the 2 pieces of fabric for the casing and turn under all of the ends by 1/2 inch and press with a hot iron. So you should have 2 strips and you turn under 1/2 inch at each end. Then either clip or pin in place. Then sew down each side of the strips where we've turned it under, taking a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and the finish. Continue until all sides are turned under. Trim any loose ends of thread and then fold in half down the centre and clip or pin in place depending on which you prefer. Do exactly the same for both of the strips. Then sew down the side of each strip, taking 1/4 inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and the finish. Then clip or pin together. Trim off any loose threads and then press the casing open, making sure that the seam is in the centre and the seam is folded over to one side. Do exactly the same to both sides. Make sure that seam is folded over to one side. And then we're going to turn both of them the right way out. Try and get a start by pushing some of the fabric out to the right side. Then I get something like a pen and push the pen inside and gradually pull the sides down so eventually it's all turned the right way out. And do exactly the same to turn the other strip the right side out. Then press both of your casings, making sure that the seam is in the centre. Now place your casings on the right side of your potato sacks and you need to determine where you want them to go. I'm going to put mine 3 inches down from the top of the bag and then leave 1 inch at each side. I'm actually doing it 4 inches down because I'm going to turn over 1 inch at the top. So measuring from the top of the bag down to the top of the casing is 4 inches, and then you should have 1 inch left at each side. So pin in position on both sides, back and front, making sure you've got 4 inches from the top and 1 inch from each side, and then pin in place. Then sew down both sides of each of the casings about 1/8 inch away from the edge, back tacking at the start and the finish. So sew up one side, turn around and come back down the other side, leaving the ends open because we're going to be putting a drawstring through the ends, so they need to be left open. Just sew down the sides. Do exactly the same for both the front and the back sack panels. Next, pin your 2 sack panels together, and this time you want the right sides on the outside, so you want to pin them together with wrong sides facing. So you should see the potatoes and the casings on the outside. Pin down both sides. Now sew down both sides and the bottom of the sack, taking 1/4 inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and the finish, and taking out any pins as you go along. Next, turn our sack the wrong side out this time and push out all the corners and then give it a quick press. And I'm clipping down my sides because we're going to do another seam to encase the first seam. This time sew taking a 1/2 inch seam allowance, again back tacking at the start and the finish and removing our clips as we go along. Sew down both sides and all the way across the bottom. Now turn the sack the right side out, and that's the side and the bottom seam's finished. It will stay this side out now. Make sure to push the corners out well. Now we're going to turn the top edge down by 1 inch. So I'm turning it under and then pressing as I go along. I also clip as I go along. So I press a bit and then I clip. Keep turning under 1 inch, pressing and then clipping all the way around until you get back to where you started. If you don't want to use clips, you can use pins. Then sew all the way around the top edge, back tacking to begin with and taking a 3/4 inch seam allowance and removing all the clips or pins as you go along. Keep going all the way around until you get back to where you started from, back tack, and then you're finished. To make the casing, cut strips of fabric 2 inches wide and as long as you can. To join them, put them together at right angles with right side facing and then draw a 45-degree angle from the top left hand corner of the top strip to the bottom right hand corner of the bottom strip and then pin in place. And sew the 2 pieces together along the line that we've drawn. If you need to attach more than 2 pieces, then go ahead and do the same to as many strips as you need to. Finger press the joins open, then fold the strip in half lengthways and press. Continue to press in half for the whole length of your strip or strips of fabric. Then fold each side to the middle. So the middle will be the mark you made when you folded it in half. So first do one side, then do the other side, and do this for the whole length of the strip, and then fold it in half again, and repeat this process all the way down the length of your strip or strips. Then unfold the ends a little bit and turn over the end by about 1/4 of an inch, and then I just clip that in place and do the same for both of my ends of each strip. Sew down the sides of your drawstring, keeping as close to the edge as you can do, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Back tack at the start and finish of each strip, and try and keep a nice straight continuous line, and try not to go off the edge if you can. Do the same for both of your strips. The next job is to thread our drawstring through the casing. So attach a safety pin to one end of your drawstring and start to thread it through the casing at one side. Thread all the way through until you come out the other side, where you come out and go straight back in the casing on the other side of the bag, and continue all the way around until you get to the end of that side. Pull your drawstring out, and that's one of your sides threaded through. Attach your second drawstring to a safety pin, and then starting at the opposite side, thread all the way round, come out, go back in, and carry on all the way round the other casing to come back where you started from. Pull the drawstring through, and then you've got two sides threaded up. Then you need to tie a knot on each side, securing both of the drawstrings together on each side. And that is your potato sack finished. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you managed to make one of these lovely little potato sacks. If you have enjoyed the video, could you please like and subscribe?